This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Bruchim Abba, welcome everyone. Shalom Aleichem. Today is our penultimate Shiur before the Yom Tif of Pesach, Haba Aleinu L'Tova. And I would like to speak about a very important topic, but not about the Haggadah, and not even about Chametz, but about another important mitzvah that occurs in the month of Nisan. And it's something that we should all try to take advantage to be Mekayim. And by being Mekayim this mitzvah, one could be Zoicha to a very special bracha. I want to take the opportunity to, if you don't know, there's a new Haggadah that came out, published by ArtScroll. It's available at your local Svarim store, or you can order it at artscroll.com. So please take advantage of that opportunity. Today's share comes from the Sefer in Lashon HaKodesh, and we're going to speak about the mitzvah of Birchas Ilanois in Chodesh Nisan. So I want to wish Bruchim Abam to the Kollel Agra de Pirka. This is the Monday afternoon national shir. The Gemara tells us in Masechta Brachos on Daf Mem Gimel Amud Beis, Rabbi Yehuda said that Hayman din Nafak b'yoymei Nisan, one who goes out in the month of Nisan, the Chazi Ilane de Kamalavlave, and he sees trees that are blossoming. Oymer, he should say, Baruch Shaloi Chisar ba'olamai klum. Blessed is he who did not make anything lacking in this world. Ubarabai, and he created in this world Briois Toivos, good creations, Ve'ilanois Toivos, and good trees, Lehisnois Bahen Bnei Adam, in order to bring joy to people. So the Gemara is teaching us the rule, the halacha of Birchas Ilanois, and the Gemara uses very exacting language, very precise language. And even though every word is written very precisely, nevertheless, mounds and mounds and mounds of halachos are derived from every word choice and every single verbiage and every word and phrase that is employed. I want to focus on a number of the words of this statement of the Gemara and show how each word is really teaching me important halachos about this very important mitzvah. The Shulchan Aruch in the Torah and the Mechaber and Siman Reish Chav Vav dedicates an entire siman to this area of halacha. The Shulchan Aruch says, Hayotzei b'yoymei Nisan, one who goes out during the days of Nisan, v'ra ilanoi shemaitziin parach, and he sees trees that are producing flowers. Oymer, he should say, Baruch ata Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, sheloi chisar ba'olamai klum, ubara bai, briois toivos, v'ilanois toivos, Leihanois bahem b'nei Adam. Ve'enoi mevarech ela pamachas b'chol shana v'shana. And you only make this bracha once a year. V'michar levarech. If you delayed making the bracha until after the fruit grew, you do not make the bracha anymore. In other words, it has to be a tree that produces flower. And the Sefer Piskei Teshuvos points out that the fact that the Torah and Shulchan Aruch dedicated an entire siman just to this area of halacha, that shows, and by the way, when it comes to other simanim, it incorporates many, many brachos in one siman. That shows us the importance and the significance of this particular bracha. Why compose an entire siman just for the halachos of Birchas Ilanois? This shows us the chashivas of Birchas Ilanois. Now, why do we make a bracha on a fruit tree? After all, if Chazal were masakein a bracha on Pirchei Ilanois, on a fruit tree, I mean, we're not talking about someone who eats the fruits, because once it turned into a fruit, you can't even make a bracha anymore. It's just a matter of seeing it. Why? What is so significant about seeing a fruit tree? So the Aruch HaShulchan in Siman Reish Chav Vav explains that we're giving a shavach v'haidah to Hashem Yisbarach, that He created for man even items that are not necessity, but are just luxury. Think about it. We're not making a bracha if you see wheat growing, or if you see water, or if you see other staples of diet, even vegetables. The Aruch HaShulchan says because they are hechreichios, they are absolutely necessary to live. But the fact that Hashem created items in this world, not because we need it, not because we couldn't survive without it, but rather because He wants to make us happy, that shows a special bracha from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it warrants that we are mavarichim with a special bracha. Meaning, we see that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is interested not only in our survival, but in our happiness and in our enjoyment. And we could learn the importance of being careful in this bracha from the conduct and the practice of Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Zecher Tzaddik Levracha, where in the Halicha Shlema it's brought down that Rav Shlomo Zalman was very zoriz and careful and energetic and displayed great alacrity when it came to this bracha, and he once even said in happiness about himself that from the time he became bar mitzvah, he was not lacking in this bracha, he did not miss this bracha even one time. Well, from the Aruch HaShulchan, who says this bracha was niskan to give shavach v'hodah for the chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that He was mative to us in creating fruits, we see that we could understand why the poskim tell us that we don't make a bracha on a barren tree. Mishnah Berurah brings in Siman Reish Chavav Siv Katan Beis, dafka on a flower. Right, you make the bracha on a flower, but not on a leaf. And even a flower, only a flower if it's a fruit tree, that from this flower it will develop into a fruit. Now, what about if the whole reason why we make the bracha is to show that Hashem wants to be mahana us, then what about if it's a tree that is arla? So the poskim are dan, do you make a bracha if it's a tree which is arla? Rabbi Kiva Eger is masupik, that if the tree is within the first 3 years, do you make the bracha? But he says like this, he says if it's safek arla, you do make a bracha, because normally you don't make a bracha misafek. However, a safek arla b'chutz la'aretz is mutter. Other poskim, namely we bring in a footnote in the Makar Chaim, he says that another reason why you would make a bracha, he said perhaps even if it's vadai arla, it is a fruit tree, and there is a certain hana that you get by seeing it. By the way, and just like it has to be a fruit tree, if it is a fruit tree, but it's not a tree that's producing fruits, or the Lahiris Nasan, Rav Nasan Gestetner Paskins, that you do not make a bracha on a fruit tree that is not currently producing fruit. The Piskei Teshuvos brings likewise, if it's an old tree or a sick tree that it's not currently producing fruit, you would not make a bracha. Now the Gemara says, Hayman did nafak b'yoymei Nisan. He who goes out during the days of Nisan, the lashon of the Gemara is, V'chazi ilane dekama lavlavi. He sees trees that are blossoming. Ilani. Ilane implies plural. So does that mean that in order to make the bracha on the fruit tree, you have to have more than one tree? So the Kaf HaChaim writes in Siman Reish Chavav Siv Katan Beis that you don't have to have two types of tree. As long as you have two trees, even if it's the same species, you can make a bracha. However, lechatchila, you should try to find a place that has many trees in order to be maleh through the bracha, all the sparks of kedusha, wherever they may be. So the Kaf HaChaim is saying that you, even though you don't have to have two species of tree, you do need to have two different trees. The Das Torah, in the name of the Eish Avram of Buchach, also says you need to make the bracha dafka on two different trees. The Chida, in the Marba Etzba, and Ois Kuf Tzadiches, he says the medaktikim are makbid, it should be two trees. So the Tzitz Eliezer is a medayek from the Chida. The Chida doesn't say you must have two trees. The Chida says that those who are medaktik, they are medaktik to have two trees, and therefore it would only be a chumrah to have two trees. And lahalacha, it would seem that you can make a bracha even on one tree, and that was the personal custom of Moshe Feinstein, brought in Shalos Teshuvos Ruvos Ephraim Chelek Chesim and Ayin Vav, that indeed Rav Moshe would make Birchas Ilanois even on one tree, but the Rabbi Ephraim says that if you're able to be mahader, to do it on 2 trees, that's even better. So that's analyzing the words ilani. But now let's focus on the words Haiman denafek biyoimei Nisan, the days of Nisan. Is that lav dafka, that you could only make the bracha during the daytime? Or can you even make the bracha during the nighttime? Right? Is yoimei dafka or lav dafka? When it says Haiman denafek biyoimei. And the Rambam says, the Rambam also uses Lashon yoimei. So the Poskim say, no, yoimei is lav dafka. It only says yoimei because typically, when would you see a tree? You would see a tree during the day, but if you happen to see a tree at night, the Tzitz Eliezer writes that you indeed would make a bracha. The Rabbi Ephraim also says that indeed you would make a bracha, because he says that, do women make Birchas Ilanos? So the Poskim say, well, you can make it, it's possible to be Mekayim day and night, and it's Ein Hazman Grama, so clearly it's a bracha you can make even in the nighttime. So therefore the Poskim say, when the Gemara says, one who goes out during the days of Nisan, days does not mean, and not the night, days mean just typically, I would have said a little bit different, not that it picked day, because typically you would see a tree during the day and not the night, but days refer to the time period as opposed to daytime, excluding the night. Now, there is a very interesting ruling in the Kaf HaChaim. The Kaf HaChaim, Rabbi Yaakov Chaim Sofer, in Sven Reish Chavav, Sivkat and Daled, he wants to know, can you make Birchas Ilanos on Shabbos? And he comes and he asserts that one should not make Birchas Ilanos on Shabbos. Why? Maybe you're going to move the tree, or maybe you're going to take a flower to smell, or you'll uproot a flower. And then he brings, especially according to the mystics, who write that the purpose of this bracha is to select out the sparks of Kedusha from the tree. So now you're violating a lav of boirar. You're selecting, boirar. You're selecting the neshama out of the tree. And therefore, for these 2 reasons, one should not do, says the Kaf HaChaim, one should not do Birchas Ilanos on Shabbos. However, the Achronim vehemently disagree with the Kaf HaChaim. Rabbi Vadi Yosef in Shal Shuvas Yichavadas Chelak Aleph Siman Beis, he says, we know the halacha is that one, if you have a hadas that's attached to the ground, you're allowed to smell it on Shabbos. But an esrog attached, you're not allowed to smell it. Why? A hadas, a myrtle, is meant to smell. So you're not going to come to pluck it. An esrog is meant to eat, so if we allow you to smell it, you might come to pluck it. So we see from here that only something which is meant to eat are you not allowed to smell. So certainly, says Ravad, you should be able to make Birchas Ilanos on Shabbos, because you don't have to touch the fruit to make the bracha. You can look at the fruit. It's different. I can understand maybe you're not to smell a fruit tree on Shabbos, because when you smell a fruit tree, sometimes you hold the fruit, or sometimes you may come to pluck the fruit. But when it's a matter of making a bracha on something you see, you don't have to get near it. Another chiluk, the Rebbe Vadia says, when it comes to smelling, there were goyzer and a hadas, because when you smell something, you get very close to it. But when you need to look at something, you don't have to get so close to it. In other words, Rebbe Vadia is saying 2 things. If you're allowed to smell a hadas, because it's meant for smelling, certainly you should be allowed to make a bracha on Birchas Ilanos on Shabbos, because you don't have to touch it at all. It's enough to look at it. And the gezerah by an esrog, that since you're smelling it, you might come to pluck it, is only because when you smell a fruit, you get very close to it. But to make a bracha on ri'iyah, you don't have to get close to it at all. And regarding this assertion of the Kaf HaChaim, that somehow by making the bracha and you're selecting out the neshamas from the tree or over boirer, Rabbi Vadia says, who says that by spiritual selecting there's an Isser of Boirer? The malachos that are also on Shabbos, we learn out from the Mishkan. And whatever the Rabbanu are Masakein, they're Masakein Ke'en D'Oraisa. And Rabbi Avram Falaji, in the Sefer Vayemaher Avram, he wrote, in the name of Rav Hagoyin, Rav Avram Punchri Muli, he asks, how are you allowed to daven on Shabbos, but you're doing Boirer? You're selecting out the Kedusha from the Psoiles. And he answered, well, because otherwise, it's pikuach nefashos for the tzaddikim. Rabbi Vadia says, look, I can't ask questions on ein meshivin al hadrush, but in general, when it comes to halacha, one may not mix and create halachas based on Kabbalah. The Radvaz writes in a tshuva in Chelek Dalet Siman Kovches, he says, let nobody suspect me that I'm paskening halacha al derech ha-Kabbalah. The Chida writes in the Maras Ha'ayin that also you're not allowed to extract halacha from soid. And the Chassam Sofer says, in my opinion, anyone who mixes Kabbalah with halacha is violating loisizra karmacha kalayim. You're over on kalayim, you're over on shatnas, if you mix Kabbalah with halacha. So therefore the bottom line is, to say you're over on boirer for making Birchas Ilanos on Shabbos is not accepted lahalacha, and in Shal Sechuvas Be'er Moshe and in Halicha Shloima Rosh Zalman Auerbach, they both paskin that you're allowed to make Birchas Ilanos on Shabbos. And the Stipler Lamaisa, it's reported in the Orchos Rabbeinu that on his way to Shul, if he would encounter a fruit tree on Shabbos, he would make the bracha. And in the autobiography of the Aderes, Rabbi Elio David Rabinowitz Teumim, he Davka tried to make this bracha on Shabbos in order to be able to make 100 brachos. Now, another thing you could ask is, the Gemara says, Hayman de Nafak B'yoyme de Nisan, one who goes out in the month of Nisan. So the question is, do you only make this bracha in Nisan, or could you make this bracha any other time? Let's say you live in an area where the fruit trees are blossom earlier, or they're delayed. Let's say it's in Ibriyar, and the fruit trees are blossoming in Adar Beis. Or let's say it's an early year, and they're not blossoming until Iyar. So the Birkei Yosef, the Chida, has this chakira. He says, what about Shekedim, that they are mamaher lehisbashal before Nisan? The Gemara implies you would not make a bracha. The Chida says, in his opinion, he heard that al derech ha-Kabbalah, the bracha of Birchas Eilanos is connected dafka to Nisan. So he says that even almonds that typically blossom before Nisan, one should try to wait until the month of Nisan to make the bracha, and that is the ikar, that the Chida says that the Birchas Eilanos should only be made during the month of Nisan. And the Kaf HaChaim says that there's a machloikes, and therefore, and the Gemara is mashma hayman de nafak b'yoyme de Nisan, and normally we utilize the rule of safek brachas lahakel. One should only make the bracha Birchas Eilanos in the month of Nisan, and that is the minhag. However, if you did not make it in Nisan, says the Chida, it would seem that you could make it even afterwards without Shemu Machos. And the Sefer Pesach Hadvir, he brings Kabbalistically the bracha Birchas Eilanos is specifically connected to the month of Nisan. This is the opinion of the Kaf HaChaim. This is the opinion of Maran Gaon Uzeino the Chida. However, lahalacha, the poskim right, you could make this bracha even in Adar or in Iyar. The Gemara says Nisan, says the Ritva, Hayman de Nafak B'yom de Nisan, Yoime Nisan lav davka, in every location according to when the trees blossom. And the Tzitz Eliezer brings from other Rishonim as well, that the way they codify the Gemara is Hayman de Nafak Kigoin b'Nisan. For example, in Nisan. Nisan is just an example, a typical example of a month that you would see trees that are blossoming. And this is how the Makar Chayim paskins, and the Chayei Adam and Klal Samach Gimel Sef Beis, and this is the conclusion of the Mishnah Brura. The Mishnah Brura says, Siv Katan Aleph b'yomei Nisan, Orcha demilsa nakad, sha'az darach aratzois hachamim lelavlev ha'ilanois. So then the question is, if Nisan is lav dafka, the Gemara should just say, Haiman denafak, v'chazi ilani dekam lavlabi. Why does it have to say b'yomei Nisan? So the Yismach Moshe in Shas Tshuvas Heishav Moshe gives an amazing answer. He says the answer is very simple. Why the Gemara says Haiman denafak b'yomei Nisan? If the Gemara would have just said Haiman denafak v'roi ilane dekam lavlabi, then I might say that if 30 days pass and he doesn't see any blossoming trees, and then he sees another blossoming tree, you would think that you make the bracha again. So therefore the Gemara says, Haiman denafak b'yomei denisan, meaning only once a season, only one time. Nisan is just an example, but it says an example lest you think that every 30 days you're going to make the bracha again. By the way, the Hartzur of Tzu Pesach Frank writes that even if you want to say that Nisan is dafka, you could say it depends on the locale, it depends on your area. Meaning, in a region where plants and trees grow earlier or later in the year, then every country and every region will have its Nisan. Even those places, let's say like the Kaf HaChaim, or the Chida, that say it's Dafka Nisan, but if you live in South America, where it's not Nisan, it's a different month, and that's when all the trees blossom, well, that month is the Nisan for that location. By the way, the Chassam Sofer has an amazing Chidush. Chassam Sofer says that the Gemara doesn't say Haiman de Nafek, Ve'roi B'chodesh Nisan. It doesn't say someone who goes out in the month of Nisan. It says Haiman de Nafek B'yoymei Nisan, in the days of Nisan, meaning in the Tekufa of Nisan. There are 4 Tekufas a year. The spring season is called Tekufas Nisan. And therefore, sometimes Tekufas Nisan could begin on Chaf Nisan. If Tekufas Nisan begins on Chaf Nisan, then you have 30 days from Chaf Nisan, you have all the way until Chaf Iyar. So the Chassam Sofer learns that even if Nisan is Dafka, but it's not the month of Nisan, but rather it's the Tekufa of Nisan. And the Rabbi Vadi Yosef Paskins in Yechavadas, in the very first Tshuva in Yechavadas, Chelak Aleph, Siman Aleph, he says, Le'inyan halacha l'maisa. L'chatchila, you should not make the bracha in Adar. You should try to wait until Nisan in order to be Yotzei, the opinion of all Deos. And that's the opinion of the Rishon LeZion and Shas Chos Mishtei Uziel. But if you did not have the opportunity to make the bracha, Birchas Ilanos, until Nisan is over, you can make Birchas Ilanos even in Chodesh Iyar. And this way don't lose out on this precious bracha. So you should try to make it in Nisan, but if you didn't make it in Nisan, you're allowed to make it Birchas Ilanos in Iyar, and so as not to lose out on this precious bracha, and rely on the Rishonim who say that Yoymei Nisan could go in Yoymei Nisan, for example. So I just want to conclude that even though l'chatchila you should still try to make the bracha Nisan, even if the Gemara's Lashon Nisan's lav dafka, because the Chida brings in the name of the Chachmei Emes that the Zman of Birchas Ilanos is dafka in Chodesh Nisan, and it was niskan that it should be said in Kufas Chag Pesach. And I want to just suggest an important, a humble reason why Birchas Ilanos is connected to this man of the year and to the Yom Tov of Pesach. The Elyo Rabbah brings that someone who is zahir in this bracha, about such a person we say, Re'ei reach b'ni k'reach sada asher berchai Hashem v'yiten lecha, which is basically the bracha of Tal. Now, it is well known, Meir Shapiro says, others say, the reason why we daven for Tal on Pesach, why do we daven for Tal on Pesach? Because the bracha of Tal was given to Yaakov Avinu the night of Pesach. When Yaakov Avinu came to serve his father and to get the brachas, he brought his father Shnei Gedai Yeizim, Echad leChagiga ve'Echad lePesach. And what bracha did Yaakov Avinu give? Did Yitzchak give Yaakov Avinu? He gave him the bracha of V'yiten lecha. We know that the night of Pesach, that's the night that is predisposed to regaining and reclaiming that we are the ones that were blessed from Yitzchak Avinu. The brachas that were given from Yitzchak to Yaakov, they were given Leil Pesach. In fact, one of the reasons for stealing the Afikoman, which is a very, very difficult, one of the reasons for stealing the Afikoman, which is a very difficult minhag, many say that one should not observe this minhag, it's not a correct minhag. I'll even share with you. The Reb Chaim Brisker said that this is not a correct minhag, and Reb Shlomo Zalman did not allow his children to fulfill this minhag. However, the Sefer Ataras Yeshua brings that the minhag of stealing the Afikoman is sort of to emulate Yaakov Avinu, who tricked Esav and tricked his father in order to get the brachos the night of the Seder. In fact, the Gra learns that the whole period of Chad Gadya is tracing the brachos that Yitzchak Avinu gave to Yaakov on this night of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and ultimately those brachos are returned to Yaakov Avinu, and those brachos are what we achieved the night of the Seder. So therefore, the brachos that Yaakov was given the night of the Seder, it's the bracha of V'yiten lecha. It's the bracha of Re'ei Reach B'ni K'reach Sada Asher Berchai Hashem. So since this is the time of the year that we are endeavoring to be zoichet to the Birchas Yaakov, to the bracha of V'yiten lecha, to the bracha of Re'ei Reach B'ni K'reach Sada Asher Berchai Hashem, therefore to show that we have to do an avodah on our part in order that these brachos are awakened and that we're given access to it again. So therefore we have the great avodah of Birchas Ilanos, where we're Mevarech Hashem, and we show that we recognize His great kindness. So by thanking Him, so Hashem gives us the opportunity to again be zoicha to the great brachos that Yitzchak Avinu gave Yaakov Avinu, which is Re'ei Reach B'ni K'reach Sada Asher Berchai Hashem. And by making the bracha on the Ilanos, we are doing the avodah mitzidenu, through which we could be zoichet to receive these brachos and to reclaim these brachos. And in fact, we should all be eligible to the great bracha of Re'ei Reach B'ni K'reach Sada Asher Berchai Hashem V'yitein Lecha Elokim Mital Hashamayim. And as Rav Meir Shapiro explains, the reason why Tal is so connected to the Yom Tov of Pesach is Tal is very different than Geshem. Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz explains that rain is when there's precipitation down here in this world, it rises up, it condenses, and it comes back down. So rain begins down here in this world, and it ends in the Shamayim, and it comes back down. Dew begins and emanates from the moisture of the atmosphere of the heaven. So Shabbos time, Rosh Hashanah time, Sukkot time, is the Zman of Tshuva. That reflects rain, where we have to do our avodah, and when we do our part, that represents the moisture in the atmosphere down here on earth, then Hashem does His part. As opposed to Pesach time, which is Kulai Rachamei Shamayim, entirely the mercy from heaven, where Pesach time we were naked and bare of mitzvahs, we are Amem Teshari Tum, and Hashem gifted us all of our spiritual gifts, and that is why the dew tal is the appropriate tefillah to be mispala for on Pesach. So we should all be zoicha to be zahir in the great mitzvah of Birchas Ilanois. If you're able to find an area where there's even more than one tree, that's, again, you could make it on one tree, but to do it on more than one tree, it is considered a hiddur, and we should all be zoicha to the bracha of Yiten L'cha Elokim Mitala Shamayim Mishmani Haaretz V'roiv Dagan B'sirosh. Okay, I look forward to seeing you Bez Hashem next Monday. That will be the last year before Yom Tif. You could join us Wednesday morning at 10:45. There's a brief Dvar Torah. That's the new schedule, and then the main Wednesday shiur is 8:30 p.m. Wishing you all a wonderful week. Bracha v'atzlacha. Baruch Tiyah.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.